The orbital station above Kethmore was one of the largest structures ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Its hull stretched 3 kilometers from end to end, its interior a maze of training halls, dormitories, weapon ranges, and lecture rooms that smelled of metal and recycled air. The Voss Military Academy had stood for over 200 years, and in that time it had trained soldiers, officers, and commanders from 47 different species, Vethani warriors with their thick-scale hides, Drethian tacticians with 4 arms and 4 minds worth of strategy, Ledhani scouts who could see in total darkness, Morvan engineers who understood weapons the way others understood. Breathing. Humans had been admitted for exactly 3 years. In those 3 years, 2 human males had enrolled. One had graduated near the middle of his class, and one had left in the second term, quietly, without explanation. Sarah Voss was the first human female to walk through the academy's front gate, and she did it on a cold Tuesday morning with a single bag on her shoulder and the kind of calm face that gave nothing away. The intake hall was enormous, ceiling so high the upper walls disappeared into shadow, and rows of students from a dozen different worlds all waiting to have their cards stamped and their quarters assigned, and Sarah stood in line without fidgeting, without looking at her boots, without doing any of the things nervous people do. She looked around instead. She looked at every face, every posture, every way each species held itself. The Vethani students stood at the back of the room in a loose group, broad and tall, their scaled necks marked with the red clan stripe of warrior caste families. They were the ones the academy had been built around, in many ways, and one of them, the tallest, was already looking at her. His name was Rokale, though Sarah did not know that yet. He was 22 years old, nearly 2.5 meters tall, and he had won every combat assessment in the previous year's intake class. He wore that fact the way some people wear expensive clothes, like it was meant to be seen from across the room. He looked at Sarah the way someone looks at a word in a sentence that does not belong there. She met his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away, not because she was intimidated, but because she had already seen what she needed to see. Her dormitory room was small and plain, and she liked it immediately. She unpacked her bag with the same quiet efficiency she did everything, clothes folded and placed, books stacked by subject, one small photograph of 2 older humans placed face up on the desk, and then she sat on the edge of her bed and read the academy's orientation document from front to back without skipping a single page. Most students, she had been told, skimmed it. Sarah read it twice. The first day of orientation brought all combat division students into a large briefing room, and an automated system displayed the biological assessment profile of each species represented in the intake class. It was standard procedure, meant to help instructors calibrate physical training expectations. When the human profile came up on the display, there was a sound from the back of the room. It was laughter, not loud, but not hidden either. The profile showed Sarah's recorded strength ratings, bone density, and physical endurance scores against the class average. Every number was below the mean, and the automated voice read them out in the same flat tone it used for everything else. Lower baseline physical output than 68% of enrolled species, elevated cardiovascular recovery rate, reduced skeletal resilience, lifespan projection within standard parameters for the species. More laughter. Then a voice, low, deliberate, carrying across the room the way voices do when the speaker knows everyone will hear and wants them to. They admitted this to the combat division. It was Rokale, sitting 3 rows back, his red clan stripe visible even in the dim briefing light, his arms folded across his chest like a door being closed. "It is an insult to the institution," he said, "not to anyone in particular, and to everyone at once. A human girl in the combat division is a joke that the Accord has played on all of us." Several Vethani students made the sound their species makes when they agree with something, a short click at the back of the throat. Sarah sat in the second row. She did not turn around. She did not say anything. She wrote a note in the margin of her orientation booklet, kept her eyes on the display screen at the front, and waited for the briefing to continue. The student sitting 1 seat to her left, a small 4-eyed Morvan named Duvak who had not laughed, glanced sideways at her face, trying to read her expression. There was nothing to read. That, he would think later, was the part that stayed with him. After the briefing, students filed into the common mess hall for the first shared meal, and this was where the academy's social structure began to form, the way it always did in the first week, groups pulling toward groups, species sitting near species, the Vethani claiming the long tables at the back the way they claimed everything, with the simple confidence of people who expected the world to arrange itself around them. Sarah took a tray, collected her food, and sat at an empty table near one of the wide observation windows. Outside, The gas giant Kethmore rolled in slow orange and yellow bands. Enormous and unhurried, filling the entire lower half of the view. She ate and she watched and she said nothing. Rokale made sure to walk past her table on his way to sit with his group. He did not stop, did not say anything. He simply looked at her the way a person looks at furniture they intend to move later. One of his companions, a Vethani named TV who was slightly shorter and significantly quieter than the rest, glanced back at Sarah as they passed. She was cutting a piece of food on her tray with focused attention, and her eyes were completely still. TV kept walking. But that night, in his quarters, he pulled up the Academy's public resource library and typed a single search into the terminal. Human species, history, combat, pre-accord. The search returned 412 results. He opened the first one, read for 10 minutes, and then sat very still in his chair for a while. He did not mention it to Rokale. Before lights out, the Combat Division's training schedule was posted to every student's personal screen, and at the bottom of the schedule, in the same plain font as everything else, was a single line that most students scrolled past without reading. All students are encouraged to review cross-species anatomy resources available in the Academy Library. Familiarity with the physical structure of fellow cadets is considered a core competency. Sarah read it, highlighted it, and added it to her reading list. She turned off a light, lay on her back in the dark, and stared at the ceiling of her small plain room. Outside, Kethmore turned slowly in the dark, orange and enormous and completely indifferent. Sarah closed her eyes. She was already thinking about tomorrow. The first week passed the way first weeks always do at military academies, in a blur of schedules, assessments, rules, and the quiet sorting of students into those who would last and those who would not.
Sera lasted.
She not only lasted, she showed up to every session 5 minutes early, completed every physical drill without complaint, and turned in written assessments that Instructor Velsarin read twice before assigning grades, not because they were wrong, but because they were more complete than he had expected. Velsarin was a Drethian, tall, grey-skinned, with 4 arms that moved with the precise economy of someone who had spent decades learning not to waste motion. He had been teaching at the Academy for 30 years, and he had a reliable sense, honed over those 30 years, of which students had potential and which ones were just marking time. He was not yet sure what to make of the human. She was quiet in a way that was not shyness. It was more like the quiet of a room that is very carefully arranged, and she watched everything. With those flat dark eyes that gave other species a vague and unnamed discomfort. But her physical scores were below average, and the Academy's combat division ran on physical scores. That was simply the reality of the institution, and so Velsarin filed his uncertainty away and continued with the term. Rokale, on the other hand, had no uncertainty at all. He had decided on the first day what Sarah was, and every day after that was simply confirmation. In the sparring rotation during the second week, he arranged, through the small social currency of being the most feared student in the division, for Sarah to be paired with partners who outmassed her by significant margins. A Vedhani first year named Grath, who was built like a wall and had the disposition of one, and a Lethani scout track student who had a tendency to play rough with people she did not respect. Sarah was knocked to the mat 7 times in 2 sessions. Each time, she got up. She did not complain to the instructor. She did not even look frustrated. She simply stood, adjusted her stance, and came back in, and each time she came back in she was doing something slightly different, adjusting, reading, like a person working through a problem one careful step at a time. During equipment drills in the 3rd week, Rokale hit her across the forearm with a practice staff at full swing, calling it accidental, of course, the kind of impact that left bruises lasting days, and the sound of it crossing her arm caused several nearby students to wince. Sarah did not wince. She stepped back, looked at her arm for exactly 1 second, and then stepped back into the drill. Rokale watched her from the corner of his eye for the rest of the session. She did not favor the arm. She did not protect it. She drilled with it for another 40 minutes as if nothing had happened, and that was the first time, though he would never have admitted it, that Rokale felt something other than contempt when he looked at her. He buried the feeling immediately and moved on. In the 4th week, the first round of combat theory exam scores was posted. The combat division had 43 students in the current intake, and when the results appeared on the board, Rokale checked his own score first, as he always did, 91 out of 100, which was exactly what he expected, because he was exactly as good as he had always known himself to be. Then he looked at the ranking column. The name at the top was not his. It was Voss, S, with a score of 97. He read it 3 times. Then he went very still in the way that large, dangerous things go still when they are deciding something. The social isolation of Sarah had been building quietly in the background of all of this. Small things, the kind that are easy to dismiss one at a time, students moving away from her table in the mess hall, lockers near hers left conspicuously empty, invitations to group study sessions that never seemed to reach her, and all of it traced back, in one way or another, to the quiet steady pressure of Rocale's disdain radiating outward through the division like heat from something very hot. 2 students had tried to be friendly to Sarah in the first 2 weeks, a small Adhani girl named Kiss who sat near her in theory class, and Duvak the Morvan, who had been sitting beside her during the orientation briefing, and both of them had found, within days, that being friendly to Sarah came with a social cost that most first-year students did not want to pay. Kiss paid it anyway. She moved her things to Sarah's table in the mess hall one evening and sat down and said nothing, just started eating, and Sarah looked at her and then looked back at her food and said nothing either, and that was how their friendship began. No ceremony, no conversation, just 2 people deciding without words that they were on the same side. The formal challenge came on a Thursday. Rocale stood up in the middle of the mess hall after the midday meal, while students from 3 species were still seated and eating, and he looked across the room at Sarah's table and issued it in the traditional Vedhani form, loud, public, and binding under Academy rules. I formally challenge Cadet Voss to a sparring match under Academy protocol, open arena, standard rules, witnessed by the division. Under Academy rules, a formal challenge could not be refused without the challenged student forfeiting their standing in the combat division. The mess hall went quiet. Everyone looked at Sarah. She was holding a cup of something warm between both hands, and she looked across the room at Rocale with the same expression she had worn in the orientation briefing, calm, flat, unreadable, and then she set the cup down. Accepted, she said. No hesitation, no pause, no sign that the word cost her anything at all. Rocale smiled, a slow, satisfied smile, and turned back to his table. Kiss, sitting across from Sarah, leaned forward and said very quietly, "Sarah, he has put 3 students in the medical bay this year. You do not have to do this." "I know," Sarah said. "Then why?" "Because," Sarah said, picking up her cup again, "he was going to do this eventually. I would rather it happen on a day when I am ready." Kiss stared at her. "Are you ready?" Sarah looked at the cup in her hands for a moment. "I have been ready," she said simply, "since the 2nd week." At a table near the door, TV watched the whole exchange without speaking, but later that evening he pulled up the cross-species anatomy database and searched, specifically, for the nerve and joint vulnerabilities of Vedhani physiology. He told himself he was just curious. He sat with that lie for about 4 minutes before he admitted, quietly and alone in his room, that he was not curious at all. He was worried. And he was worried because he had read 412 entries on human history, and he had not found a single one that ended with humans losing quietly. The night before the match felt different in the Academy. Not louder, not more chaotic, but different in a way that was hard to name. Like the air pressure had changed slightly, like the station's ventilation was working a little harder than usual. Word had spread through the combat division the way word always spreads in closed institutions, fast, and with a life of its own. And by dinner on the evening before the match, students who had paid no attention to Sarah Voss in 4 weeks were suddenly very interested in her. Some of them were interested the way people are interested in disasters, the kind of looking that happens when something is about to break and everyone can see it coming. And some of them were interested in a different way that they could not quite explain, a way that had started after the exam scores were posted and had been growing ever since, a small and quiet suspicion that the thing everyone had assumed was not the thing that was actually true. Instructor Velsarin ate his meal in his private office and reviewed the match paperwork with the professional efficiency of someone who had processed hundreds of these. Formal challenges were not uncommon at the Academy, and they were rarely as dramatic as the students involved believed them to be. He had already decided, privately, that he would allow the match to proceed to its natural conclusion, which he expected to come very quickly, and then issue a formal review of the challenge system's suitability for mixed species pairings. He had, on 3 separate occasions over the past weeks, briefly considered reading the full Terran Accord liaison file that had arrived in his inbox at the start of term. It was tagged as supplementary reading for instructors with human cadets, and each time he had looked at the notification he had decided he would get to it later. Later had not yet arrived. At 8 in the evening, Kiss knocked on Sarah's dormitory door. Duvak was with her, standing half a step behind with his 4 eyes arranged in the expression his species uses when they are trying to look calm and not succeeding, and when Sarah opened the door, they both came in and stood in the middle of her small, neat room, and Kiss said, "We wanted to talk to you about tomorrow." "I know," Sarah said. She was sitting on her bed with a tablet on her knees, reading something. "Sit down." They sat on the floor because the room had one chair and Sarah was using the bed, and Duvak said, without preamble, "Rokail dislocated a Lethani student's shoulder in a sparring match in the second month of last term. The student had top-tier physical scores for a Lethani. Rokail did it in 11 seconds. "I know," Sarah said again. "You know." "I asked Kiss to look it up for me 3 weeks ago," Sarah said. She turned the tablet around so they could see the screen. It was a detailed breakdown of every formal and informal sparring match Rokail had participated in since his first year at the academy, with timestamps, injury reports, and a set of handwritten notes in Sarah's own tight script running down the margin. Kiss looked at the screen for a long moment. "You have been preparing for this since the 3rd week," she said. "Second," Sarah said. There was a silence. "Are you going to be all right?" Duvak asked, and the way he asked it was genuine, the kind of genuine that has nothing to do with strategy, just one person asking another if they are going to be all right. Sarah looked at him, and for just a moment, something in her face shifted, not to fear, not to doubt, but to something warmer, something that did not usually live on the surface of her expression. "Yes," she said. "I am going to be fine. Thank you both for coming." They left a little after 9, and Sarah went back to her tablet and kept reading until the lights in the corridor outside dimmed to the low glow that the station used to signal the late hours. At 5 in the morning, 2 hours before the station's lights shifted to the full-day cycle, a maintenance drone on its scheduled patrol of the outer training yard recorded 4 minutes and 12 seconds of footage. In the footage, a small human in grey training clothes moved alone in the empty yard, performing a slow sequence of movements in the dark, her arms extended and pulled, her body turning and dropping and rising in patterns that had no obvious aggression in them, that looked almost like a kind of quiet conversation between her body and the air around it. The movements were old, older than the Academy, older than the Accord, older than any of the species currently sleeping inside the station had been watching the stars. They were the kind of thing that gets passed down through generations not because it is required but because it works, and things that work have a way of surviving. The drone logged the footage, classified it as non-event, and continued its patrol. No one reviewed it. At 6:45, Instructor Velsarin arrived at his office and found a new message in his inbox, a follow-up from the Terran Accord Liaison Office, flagged with a yellow priority marker that he did not remember seeing on the original file. The message read, "Reminder, supplementary cadet briefing file for human enrollees remains unread. Please review before any formal combat assessments involving Cadet Voss. The file contains relevant background that may affect match protocols." Velsarin read the message. He looked at the file attachment. He had 40 minutes before he needed to be in the arena. He clicked on the attachment, read the first summary paragraph, and then, as instructors who have been doing the same job for 30 years sometimes do, decided that one paragraph was sufficient, that he had managed combat assessments for 3 decades without supplementary reading, and that the match would be fine. He closed the file, finished his coffee, and walked to the arena. Sarah arrived at the arena 10 minutes early. She was wearing the standard issue Academy sparring uniform, plain grey, no markings, and she had her hair pulled back and her hands wrapped in the light padded guards the Academy provided for open-hand matches. She stood at the edge of the pit and looked at the resin floor. It was a dull blue-grey, slightly textured for grip, curving gently at the base of the walls. She had studied the surface before, in the 2 open training sessions the arena hosted each week, and she knew exactly how it felt. Under her feet when she moved fast and when she planted and when she dropped her weight. She was not nervous. She was the kind of still that exists on the other side of nervous, the place you reach when you have thought about something so many times, from so many angles, that it stops being a threat and becomes simply a problem, and problems have solutions, and she had found hers 2 weeks ago and had been refining it every day since. The arena began to fill above her. She could hear them coming in, the murmur of dozens of voices, the sound of tiered seating filling row by row, and she tracked them in her peripheral vision without turning, the way she tracked everything, as information, rather than distraction. When Rokail entered through the far gate, moving through the crowd the way large things move, the crowd rearranging itself around him without being asked, she felt nothing change in her body at all. She had already seen everything she needed to see. The match was going to be over in seconds. The only thing she had not yet decided was exactly how many seconds she wanted it to last. The arena at full capacity held close to 300 students, and on the morning of the match it was not quite full, but close enough that the upper tiers of the observation ring were standing room, bodies pressed against the rail, the low murmur of dozens of different species, filling the domed space with a sound like wind before rain. Instructor Velsarin took his position at the arena's edge, to the left of the pit's entrance gate, with the emergency hold control resting under his left secondary hand, a small flat panel with one button, standard issue for all supervised matches, and he held it with the practiced readiness of someone who expected to use it soon. He looked at Sarah, standing in the center of the pit, and thought, not unkindly, that she looked very small. He looked at Rocaille, entering through the far gate, rolling his neck with a sound like gravel shifting, his red clan stripe bright under the arena's full lighting, and thought, with the confidence of 30 years of combat assessment behind him, that this was going to be over quickly. He was right about that part. The match rules were simple and standard: open hand contact, no weapons, no closed fist strikes to the head, no holds targeting the spine, and the bout ended when one combatant submitted, was rendered unable to continue, or when the instructor activated the halt signal. Velsarin read them aloud in the flat official tone the rules required, and when he finished he looked at both students in turn. Do both combatants understand the terms? Yes, Rocaille said, already moving his weight slightly forward, already beginning the slow internal build-up that preceded his attacks. Velsarin had seen it in every match Rocaille had ever fought, and it was always the same. The big Vethani came in fast and overwhelming in total, a force of nature in the pit, not subtle, not technical, not needing to be. He was simply more than most opponents could process before they had time to think. Yes, Sarah said. Her voice was the same as always, quiet, even, giving nothing away. Velsarin raised his upper right hand. Begin. Rocaille moved. He crossed the distance between them in under 2 seconds, a full body charge with his leading shoulder dropped and his arms already spreading wide to control and overwhelm. It was the opening he had used in every match, the one that had ended fights before they started, and it had never once failed him. He was faster than he looked and heavier than anything that fast had a right to be, and the force he brought with him was the kind that ends arguments simply by existing. Sarah moved. She did not move back. She moved at an angle, a single sharp step to the right and slightly forward, inside his guard, closer rather than further, and as he came through the space where she had just been, her left hand came up and connected with the inside of his outstretched arm, not hitting it but redirecting it, changing its path by a small fraction that became enormous over the distance of his own momentum. And her right hand went to the back of his shoulder, not gripping, just pressing, adding nothing to his speed but adding everything to his direction. Rocaille felt the world rotate. It was not pain, it was geometry, the sudden and complete betrayal of balance, the sensation of weight that has been pointed in one direction being redirected by something impossibly small and precise, and then the floor was coming up and there was no way to stop it. He hit the resin with a sound that traveled up through the observation tiers and caused the students in the standing row at the top to step back involuntarily. 3 seconds had passed since Velsarin said begin. His hand moved toward the halt control. It did not reach it in time. Sarah was already moving, smooth and continuous, no pause between the throw and what came after, and she was on the floor beside Rocaille before he had fully processed what had happened to him, and her hands were on his primary striking arm with a grip that was not forceful but was completely and mechanically final. She had his elbow in a position that his joint had not evolved to resist, the leverage point precise and absolute, and with the amount of force a human could apply one-handed from. That angle the message his arm was receiving was extremely clear. The message was, do not move. Rocaille did not move. And then her other hand found the base of his neck, the junction of his third cervical ridge and the trapezoid muscle cluster, a point she had located in the cross-species anatomy database 3 weeks ago and had memorized with the same calm focus she brought to exam preparation, and she applied pressure. It was not a painful hold. It was a precise one, the kind that communicates to the body, without room for argument, that the person applying it knows exactly what they are doing and could do considerably more if they chose to, and Rocaille's body, which was a warrior's body and understood these things at a level below thought, understood it immediately. His free hand came down and hit the floor twice, flat, open, clear, submission. Velsarin hit the halt control. The signal tone rang out across the arena. 5 seconds too late. The silence that followed was not the silence of people holding their breath before cheering. It was the silence of 300 students trying to process something that did not fit any category they had ready for it. Rocaille, 2.5 meters of warrior caste Vethani, the most feared fighter in the student body, was on the floor of the pit with his face pressed against the resin and his arm in a lock he could not break, submitted to a human girl who weighed less than half of him, in a match that had lasted less time than it took to say his full name. He had not landed a single strike. He had not even touched her. In the upper tiers, no one spoke, not one student from any of the dozen species packed into the observation ring, and the only sound in the entire arena was the ventilation hum and the soft echo of the halt tone fading into the curved walls.
Sera stood up.
She stood in the center of the pit, her hands at her sides, and she looked across the arena at Instructor Velsarin. He was staring at her with all four of his hands completely still, the halt control held loosely in one of them, forgotten, and his expression was the expression of a person whose understanding of a situation has just been removed entirely and replaced with a different one, and the new one does not fit yet. Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she said, clearly, without heat, without performance, without anything except the simple truth of the statement, "I did not need the halt, sir. I was always in control." The silence held for 2 more seconds. Then Kiss, sitting in the third tier of the observation ring with her hands already moving, started clapping. It was a small sound at first, a single pair of hands in a space built for 300, but Duvak joined immediately, and then 2 Morven students from the back of the upper tier, and then a cluster of Lethani first years near the center who had spent 4 weeks watching. Rokale make other students smaller and had decided, in the exact moment they saw him hit the floor, that they were tired of pretending it was acceptable. The applause spread. It was not the roar of a crowd watching a champion claim something. It was something quieter and more considered, the sound of a large group of people revising something they had believed without ever really examining it, and finding that the revised version was better and truer than the original. Rokale sat up slowly on the arena floor. He looked at his arm, uninjured, just reminded of its own limits, and then he looked at Sarah, who was standing still in the center of the pit with her hands at her sides, not performing victory, not acknowledging the crowd, not doing anything except existing in the aftermath of what she had done with the same quiet certainty she brought to everything. He did not speak. He did not need to. Something in him, the part that had been bred and raised and trained for exactly this, recognized what had happened in the pit better than the watching students did and better than Velsarin did. He had been beaten, cleanly and completely and without cruelty, by someone who had understood him better than he understood himself. That was not something a warrior caste Vedhani could dismiss. That was something a warrior caste Vedhani had to respect. Tier V, sitting 3 seats to his right, was looking at the floor. He did not say, "I tried to warn you." He was too honest to pretend he had said a single word. The medical wing of the Voss Military Academy was a clean and efficient space that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, and Rokale sat on an examination table while a Drethian medic checked his arm with practiced hands and declared it structurally sound. No damage, no lasting injury, just the memory of a position it had not been placed in before. "You were lucky," the medic said. Rokale said nothing. The medic finished the assessment and left, and Rokale sat alone in the examination bay for a few minutes. Sitting still in quiet rooms was not a habit of his, and he was aware of how unusual it was, but he sat there now and he thought about how many seconds the match had lasted. He reviewed it in his head 3 times between the pit and the medical wing, and each review gave him the same result. She had known what he was going to do before he did it. She had positioned herself for his opening charge before the match had even started. The angle she moved to when he attacked was not a reaction to him. It was a prepared answer to a question she had already solved in a room somewhere, alone, days ago. That was not luck. That was not even skill the way he normally understood skill. Skill was what you built in your body through training and repetition. This was something that required a different word, something his language did not have, a word for the act of studying a problem so completely that by the time you meet it in the world, it no longer exists as a problem. He thought about that for a while. Then he got up, left the medical bay, went back to his dormitory room, and pulled up his personal terminal, and he typed Sarah Voss's name into the Academy's academic record system and began reading from the beginning, from her first week forward, every grade and every assessment score and every course selection she had made. He did not finish reading until well after midnight. He did not find anything that surprised him. Everything she had done, from the first day, made complete sense now that he was looking at it from the right direction, and the right direction, he understood, was not from above. Instructor Velsarin returned to his office immediately after the match. He sat at his desk for approximately 30 seconds doing nothing, which was notable because Velsarin was not a person who sat doing nothing, and then he opened his inbox, found the Terran Accord liaison file, and this time he did not read the summary paragraph. He read the full document. It was 47 pages long. It began with a historical overview of the human species from approximately 10,000 years before the Accord, before space travel, before contact with any other intelligent species, and it described a world of scattered and competing populations who had, with no natural weapons beyond moderate strength and reasonable speed, with no armored hides or venom or superior senses, developed and refined over millennia an extraordinary number of ways to fight each other. The document listed them, hundreds of distinct human combat disciplines, each developed in a different region of the human homeworld, each built around a different core principle: leverage over strength, precision over force, patience over aggression, the redirection of an opponent's own energy back against them as a weapon made from nothing but understanding. It described the human tolerance for pain, not greater than most species, but significantly higher than the Academy standard profiles accounted for, and it described the human capacity to continue functioning under physical stress that would cause most species to slow or stop, not because humans did not feel discomfort, but because they had, over thousands of years of necessity, learned to treat pain as information rather than as an instruction to stop. It described human pattern recognition in physical confrontation, the deep tendency to absorb and study an opponent's habits before acting, to watch for longer than felt comfortable, to prepare specific answers to specific problems rather than relying on general physical dominance that humans had never possessed. Near the end of the document, there was a note from the Terran Accord's military liaison, a human officer, and the note read, "Humans are not the most physically powerful species you will encounter. They are aware of this and they have been aware of it for their entire recorded history. What this awareness produced, over thousands of years, is a species that treats every physical confrontation as a problem to be solved rather than a contest to be won. They study, they prepare, and they do not enter fights they have not already finished in their heads." Velsarin sat with that sentence for a long time. Then he opened the Academy's curriculum database and began revising the assessment framework for human cadets, not lowering any standards, not changing any requirements, just removing the assumption, embedded in 30 years of his own practice without him ever noticing it, that biological output numbers told the whole story of what a student was capable of. It took him 3 hours. He did not mind at all. In the mess hall the following morning, something had shifted. Not dramatically. The tables were in the same places, the food was the same food, the ventilation hum was the same ventilation hum, but the arrangement of people was different in small ways. That added up to something larger. Sarah sat with Kiss, as she had done for several weeks, and Duvak arrived and put his tray down without any of the hesitation he used to carry, and then a Lethani student named Arrow, who had never spoken to Sarah before, sat down at the end of the table with his tray and said good morning in the common tongue, and Sarah said good morning back, and that was the whole exchange, and it was enough. 2 more students drifted to the table over the course of the meal, not making a statement, not performing anything, just sitting where they wanted to sit and finding that where they wanted to sit had changed since the previous morning. Rokale's table was quieter than usual. He ate without speaking, which was unusual for him, and the students around him ate without speaking too, following his lead the way they always did, except that this time the silence felt different, less like the quiet of authority and more like the quiet of something being carefully reconsidered. TV was not at his table. He was at the far end of the room, alone with his tray, and at a certain point during the meal he picked it up, stood, and walked across the mess hall to the table where Sarah was sitting. He put his tray down across from her and sat and said nothing. Sarah looked at him. He looked at her. She nodded once. He nodded back. That was all. No speech, no explanation offered or requested, no version of an apology that would have needed words to exist, just 2 people at a table, eating breakfast, and something that had been one thing quietly becoming something else. 3 weeks after the match, a new message arrived in Instructor Velsarin's inbox, routed through the Academy's administrative system from the Interstellar Enrollment Office. It was an intake confirmation for the following term. 3 new human cadets had been approved for enrollment in the combat division, 2 female, 1 male, their names listed in plain text, their biological assessment profiles attached as standard procedure, their scores sitting in the same familiar ranges that any instructor who had not read the full liaison file would look at and feel uncertain about. Velsarin read the profiles. He did not feel uncertain about a single line of them. He printed the intake confirmation and walked it down the hall to the Combat Division Faculty Lounge, where a senior Vedhani instructor named Drathvel was reviewing the current term standings with a cup of something warm in one hand. "Next term," Velsarin said, setting the paper on the table, "we have 3 more human cadets coming into the combat division." Drathvel looked at the paper, looked at the physical assessment scores, and said, in the tone of someone making what seemed to him an obvious observation, "Their profiles are below the division average again. Should we warn the other students, prepare them for the adjustment, so there are no incidents like?" "No," Velsarin said. Drathvel looked up. Velsarin was looking through the lounge window at the mess hall corridor below, and through the corridor's far window, visible if you knew where to look, was the outer training yard, where a small human in grey training clothes was moving alone in the morning light, performing the slow and deliberate forms that no one in the academy had a name for yet. She was not performing them for anyone. She was just doing the work, quiet and patient and completely in her own world. The way she always had, the way her entire species had been doing for longer than most species in the galaxy had been watching the stars and wondering what else was out there. "Let them figure it out themselves," Velsarin said quietly. "It is a better lesson." He picked up his coffee, took a sip, and walked back down the hall to prepare the day's classes. Outside, Sarah moved through her forms in the morning light, and the gas giant Kethmore turned slowly below the station, orange and enormous and completely indifferent to the small but remarkable things happening above it.